The Xbox doom cycle, it's back. Welcome back, friends, to another rendition of Xbox is doomed. Because this weekend, and it all started with some of the price changes and everything else going on, this weekend has exploded with information that is not exactly favorable if you are a fan of Xbox. Now, I want to dive into this detail because I think there's some absolute truths and some things that are, and then some other things, like, let's just go because I could explain it, but it doesn't do any good things. So the rumor and doom cycle kicked off with what I believe the most accurate information here, which comes from Bloomberg, and they said that Xbox gave up more than $300 million in sales because they put Call of Duty into Game Pass last year, which would explain why the pricing has gone up and why things are happening and everything else. Now, there's a lot to digest about this number because Microsoft gave its own conflicting reports related to this number. Now, I'm guessing, and this information comes from insiders at the company or previous employees, it really depends on how you sort of peel back the onion, right? Because yes, they may have lost $300 million in what they consider like perpetual sales. Like I give you money, you give me disc or, the digital entitlement to a game, and bada bing, bada boom. However, Game Pass growth, which we know went up, but maybe it wasn't sustainable. Maybe people only paid for 1 month and then dipped in or out. The reason why I say I'm not disputing that $300 million figure is inaccurate, but I think there's a lot of different ways it could be materialized or rationed at the end of the day. Because if you go back to when what was that, Black Ops 6 launched, Satya Nadella, the CEO of the company, straight up said this was the biggest Call of Duty release ever, setting a day one player record, which you would think would mean that, hey, more people are paying, more people are jumping in, Game Pass is growing, bada boom, bada boom, and life is good. But the reality may be that we don't have any hard figures. So yeah, it could have been the largest launch ever, mostly because, hey, they had at least 30 million Game Pass subscribers who could then try out the game without having to pay for it. So from a pure volume of user perspective, it might be the biggest launch ever. However, if those people didn't really keep playing or just walked away or stopped paying for Game Pass, then yeah, they could have lost the 300 million. The reality here is because people keep quoting Satya, and it's not, I don't fault them for doing so, is that the reality is both of these things can be true. They could have lost $300 million in what would they consider like traditional sales, but if Game Pass didn't grow by $300 million during that time frame, then yeah, it is a $300 million hit over the expectations for the sale. And so this is sort of like how Xbox is like, I think this was really the start, and I think it's really starting to become more clear about how the Game Pass sustainability for a traditional console sales cycle is really impacting things. And so we're starting to see this massive strategy shift by Xbox, and that's what really exploded this weekend with headlines and leaks and other things that have come out, because this year it's a little bit different, right? The prices have gone up. Everything is going differently, right? We saw this information last week. All of a sudden, Ultimate is $10 more per month. And people will do the semantics of, well, you get Fortnite Crew and you get Ubisoft and other stuff. We both know Microsoft didn't raise Game Pass pricing by $10 and then also increase their own cost by $10, right? Microsoft clearly found a way to, let's just say they're paying Fortnite $2.50 for everyone who does it, and Ubisoft same thing. And so they have a $5 margin or something like that. Microsoft didn't raise the price of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to make less money or break even. It is to make more money because that is the reality of the situation based on what we see from last year, which is why I believe that $300 million figure is accurate to some degree. But the problem is Microsoft just lacks extreme transparency on the outside, that it's really hard to say, did they or didn't they? But the reality is that we still don't know Game Pass subscriber numbers. The last number we got was like, almost 2 years ago now. So you got to believe that it is accurate, right? Because if Microsoft really saw some massive explosion of Game Pass subscribers and they would cross 45 million, I'm not making that number up, they clearly would have talked about it. But as we all know now, they never did. And now they're at the point in the life cycle where they're trying to extract more revenue from the existing customer base because growth has clearly stagnated. Now, one of the things that I believe is absolutely true all the way across the board is that Amy Hood, the CFO of Microsoft, is now suddenly putting a ton of more pressure on Xbox to grow. ever since Microsoft started spending big money on these studios. I mean, they're close to like $100 billion, probably even over that over the life cycle of Xbox. But in the past few years, it's like between 80 and $100 billion. You can't spend that kind of money and not have some sort of expectation of return. You could scroll back in videos on this channel from when they closed the deal. And it's like, look, okay, they've closed the deal. Now they've got to show growth. And so if the growth didn't come through organic means, they now have to, again, turn that dial on trying to extract revenue from their own customer base or reduce expenses, right? That is another way that you can also improve your standing as a business, right? You grow revenue and you reduce expenses, your margin increases. That is a very good thing. I absolutely do believe that Amy Hood is putting a ton of pressure on Xbox, and that is the reason why we are seeing all of these changes recently. And it's no coincidence, by the way, that it is happening right before the release of the next Call of Duty game, which is probably the biggest economic lever that Xbox has to grow revenue on a yearly basis. We all know they release them every year. We all know they sell. I've always joked it's $1 billion weekend, but if it was only a $700 million weekend when it launched last year, that's a big problem. That is a big problem for Xbox. And so now we're seeing the ramifications of those changes. So that leads up to this post that was over on NeoGAF. Now, this comes from an individual who has a good track record within the industry, and a lot of people are vouching that his information is generally close to correct or around there. And so it's not usually made up. And the TLDR here is that there's a lot of Xbox layoffs coming, likely in Q1 of 2026. So that's the upcoming first quarter of the year. Also, that the next gen Xbox hardware has gone from a definitive thing to back more into this maybe kind of sort of not. We're not really sure that it's maybe up in the air again, which would be a huge shift from what basically Xbox has been talking about since even before June, but we'll talk about June here in a second. This would be a pretty significant shift, and it would align to Amy Hood being like, look, you've got to find alternative paths to grow your business or make it more profitable. Otherwise, it doesn't really fit within the Microsoft model. You've borrowed, and people will say they didn't borrow money, it's their own bank account. But yeah, but the business unit had to go to the bank of Microsoft and say, I need money to go buy this thing. And when I buy this thing, it's going to accelerate growth and you're going to get your return back. And so that's the situation that Xbox currently finds itself in. And then this post comes out and says like, what's really going on there? And yeah, and then you also see things like this coming from Tom and Jez, who both independently reported at various times that Microsoft is considering launching an ad-supported version of cloud gaming. So there you go. Like, this again is an alternative method to try to find dollars in the couch cushions from Microsoft. The whole point of this entire segment is that Microsoft is exploring alternative routes to things that probably historically may not have done if things were going exceptionally well. And so Microsoft is really digging its claws into trying to figure out how to make Xbox a much larger business than it is today. And then this is where things, I woke up to my Twitter feed or X feed, whatever, the Blue Sky feeds and everything else, other feeds blowing up. Now, this particular screenshot isn't exactly new, but the information is relative, is that Xbox apparently stopped making hardware. I cannot confirm nor deny that. That is you would have to be deeply sourced within the world of Chinese manufacturing to understand fully if that is true. However, I do fundamentally believe that they have dramatically scaled back building hardware, and we know that for multiple reasons. One, Costco announced that they were no longer to be carrying the Xbox. This image is from Sam's Club. So Sam's Club and Costco are not the same company. Somebody thought that in the comments, but they are not. They are two different companies who have the exact same business model. Sam's Club, OWN, and Walmart are the same company. And so Sam's Club no longer going to be carrying the Xbox Series going forward. And so they had some great deals if you were able to go in person. I think the reality here is, again, Microsoft has either dramatically cut back on how many Xboxes it's making, and these large vendors, these warehouse style vendors, can no longer get the supply, or they really did completely stop. And like Microsoft just has a warehouse full of them somewhere, and they'll just trickle them out into the market here probably for the holiday shopping season. And then maybe that's kind of it. I guess the thing to keep an eye on here is like, pay attention for when like a Target stops carrying an Xbox, because that would be a big deal. Especially Target and like Best Buy would be the true like canaries. If they're not carrying Xbox consoles anymore, then what is the play here? But we all know that Microsoft doesn't make money on hardware, or traditionally has not. They jacked the price up $50 at minimum, and now maybe they're saying like, look, if we're going to sell a console, it's going to make money. That's just the reality of it as it goes forward. The biggest hiccup into all of this is just in June, and this is very worthwhile to point out, that Xbox and AMD announced their next generation of gaming partnership. Now, we all sort of agree that Microsoft is going to be building another console. Phil Spencer says, hey, we're not getting out of hardware. However, things change, right? It's hard for me to swallow the fact that they would make this huge announcement, and AMD made the announcement too, and like they did all this stuff, had this huge announcement, and then not ship a next generation Xbox, which has been potentially rumored once again, or maybe limited or scaled down. The reality here is that you could really manipulate and mold this thing many different ways to make it true, regardless of your stance. So if, let's just pretend that they do not build a first-party hardware, but they do build first-party experiences, meaning Asus, Acer's, Lenovo, or whoever builds an Xbox, right? And that's running with Xbox hardware inside, running an AMD chip that they designed together with their whatever platform that's going to allow them to have forward and backwards capability, and then they ship this thing as an Xbox console, but it's not made by Microsoft. Does that change the narrative of this post? Maybe, like, things change. And if Xbox is truly like not hitting their metrics for growth and performance, and then they're going to come to Amy and say like, look, okay, we're going to go build this console now. I need another, building hardware is not cheap. I'm making this number up, but let's say I need another $1 billion to go spin up the fabs and get everything and get the allocations that we need and go do that. If you're Amy Hood and you're like, look, you've missed on everything else, you got to find alternative strategies. Like, and that's what she has apparently said to Xbox, which has really ignited all of this conversation. Now, here's the reality. Xbox is trying to change their business model, right? They went from a hardware software experience where you go buy a physical disc, put it in there, hit play, and pay for a subscription to go online, to purely like this subscription model. And they bought up a whole bunch of stuff to try to make that subscription model more viable, but at the sacrifice of the hardware side. And doing this is hard. Like, changing your business model is fundamentally one of the hardest and scariest things you can do. And Xbox is in the middle of it. We are experiencing the middle of this transition. We don't know what the other side is going to look like. Microsoft has historically been able to just ram this stuff through because they're corporate customers, they're enterprise customers. And it's like, what are you going to do? You can't get rid of us. And so you're just going to accept it. However, gamers have alternative options, and there's various factors that play into this. And so the reality here that everybody needs to know is that we don't quite know. There's a lot of leaks and a lot of rumors. The one thing that would be, people keep saying Microsoft should come out and make statements. Well, they will probably just point to the fact that they have made statements, right? They've made, this is their statement. And so they might be sticking to that. And so Microsoft to come out and refute and rebuttal every single rumor that comes out is not a good place to be as a company. But the reality is the Xbox doom cycle is in full force right now. And there's a lot more like, there's a lot more information backing this all up, it seems, than some of the other cycles where it's like, oh, Xbox has no games, right? We went through that Xbox has no games. How can they launch hardware? That doesn't make sense. The Xbox Series S is going to hold things back. And none of those, in my opinion, truly like materialized in a way that materially impacted the brand the way that this doom cycle is going through. And so will they come out and reinforce the fact of what's going on? They're not going to talk about the layoffs. They would never do that. There's so many reasons why they shouldn't do that. They will never do that. But if Xbox is going to be launching hardware potentially next year, they would be in much more favor. They would win a lot of favors if they just even teased something now. Remember, they did it at the Video Game Awards. What was it? The year before, like in December of the prior year to the launching the Series S and X. And so maybe they could start just doing something like that. Be like, look, we are working on some first party hardware. Here's this thing. It's coming. I think that, and just a glossed over Gaussian blur screenshot of a corner of a console, like this thing's coming, and announce it. You don't even have to announce a date, announce a year. That would go a long way to shutting up a lot of the headlines. Will they do it? I don't know. But as always, my friends, once I do know, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.